other than the abortion issue, I don't think Harris and the Democrats had anything, and it's worse than a zero. I think what they had, and the result is what they were trying to do is elect me because I'm not Trump, and that is insufficient to be deserving of the presidency.
People need heroes, and they need them so badly they'll vote for a fake hero or an anti-hero as opposed to a non-entity. And Harris is a non-entity.
That positioning of abortion as a healthcare issue and turning it into part of a welfare position, that's not just uninspiring. That's not what the issue is. That shouldn't be the way to think about it. And if that's the best you can come up with, it's sad because there's a fundamental freedom at stake.
It's unfathomable that Trump would have conceded if he had lost, and it was close like this and so on. And that really is the threat of violence. But imagine somebody voting and thinking, I don't know, I like Harris a little bit more, but if she wins, there's a real possibility of violence, and if Trump wins, there isn't. That's the threat of violence that's influencing an election. And that is what Trump has introduced into, and it's such a corruption of the system, and it's so abysmally evil.
The 2024 general elections in the United States were a stunning defeat for the Democrats. The Republican Party obviously took the presidency, it took the Senate. As of our recording, it looks like it's probably going to take the House of Representatives as well, and notably in the presidential race, the Republicans won the popular vote, not just the Republican vote, and this was the first time they had done this since 2004, George W. Bush. And all of this in spite of the fact that so many factors ostensibly favored the incumbent party, particularly the state of the economy and the mere fact that they had power. So this has occasioned a moment of soul searching for many Democrats, trying to reflect on why they lost, what they could have done better. How should they do this? What were their blind spots? What do their blind spots continue to be? Meanwhile, Republicans are running victory laps. Is there really such a reason to celebrate? Will this election make a difference? Would either party have made a real difference? What does the future hold? Well, welcome to New Ideal Live, the podcast of the Ayn Rand Institute. I'm Ben Baer, fellow at ARI. With me are my colleagues, senior fellows Elan Journo and Onkar Ghate. Elan, Onkar, there's a lot to talk about here. Why don't we start by talking about, did either party in this election deserve to actually win?
I don't think so. So I have to say, so we don't comment on elections, pre the election, the candidates, who you should vote for. But my view, which I expressed privately, but not representative of ARI, was that Harris was going to be crushed. I could not imagine her winning a presidential election. I thought this, since I've seen her as that she sort of threw her hat in to be the presidential nominee, and now as vice president, and Biden stepping down, and that whole saga of 3-4 months or however long it was, should Biden step down? Will he step down? Can they force him out? I thought Biden will lose, and certainly after the debate that he will lose. But I also thought that if they just replace him with Harris, they will lose, and they'll lose because they deserve to lose. That you had to feel the candidate who's has something to say, has some positive positions. That is, that the electorate would view this as, yeah, I can get on board with that. And other than the abortion issue, I don't think Harris and the Democrats had anything, and it's worse than a zero, I think, what they had. And the result is what they were trying to do is elect me because I'm not Trump. And that is insufficient to be deserving of the presidency.
Yeah, I was going to add something about sorry, Ben. I was going to add something about that episode of people questioning whether Biden's too old, and there was a lot of coverage about that. And then he goes on stage in the debate, and it's so obvious that he just is not with it. In fact, I think one of the takeaways that people should have had from that is, why is he even in office right now? It's irresponsible for him to be where he is, and it's even more irresponsible to think and to cover up for the fact that he is in this condition, and that why would anyone think he should be in office for 4 more years? And I think that revealed a level of wishful thinking or wishing the facts away on the part of the Democratic machine, or the party as a whole, because they make these decisions as a whole. To me, that was a stunning. They pull the curtain back. This is really what you think should be running the country, and then we get the quick maneuvering out of that with no acknowledgement. Yes, we spent a long time telling you otherwise, and there was misleading information and shutting people down about the fact that this is a question. Again, I wish the presidency were not as significant a part of the government as it's become. It's much bigger than it ought to be in the sense of its power. But the reality is, it is an extremely powerful branch of government, and it's really reckless to think that someone in Biden's condition should have been in that position, or should have even been allowed to run. Let me throw it back to you, Ben. I know you wanted to chime in.
I mean, I think it's if you look at the total votes for each party, which still haven't been counted, it's something like the Republicans for Trump got maybe 1 million more than they did in 2020, up from 72 million to 73 million. But the Democrats lost a stunning number, something like 9 million votes, 81, down from 81 million to 72 million. And actually, I think the numbers I gave for the Republicans were higher than what I mentioned before. But I think that has to mean that a bunch of people who voted for Biden in 2020 simply didn't turn out for Harris. And that means that Harris lacked something that Biden had. Even if these voters didn't want Trump, they didn't see Harris as sufficient alternative to him. And I mean, there's been all kinds of commentary about how Harris, in part it's because she was introduced at the last minute, and so never really ran a serious campaign, didn't actually have to win the primary. And as a result of that, we don't know that much about her. Her vice presidency certainly didn't give her much of a platform to introduce herself. And when you look at her campaign in 2019 in that Democratic primary, she's obviously running way to the left. She's in the recent election tried to bury her old positions, tried to retreat from the kind of so-called woke positions that she had celebrated back then, but that she's not fooling the Americans about this by simply not talking about it. There's a video that made a big impact in one of the campaign ads where she comes out in favor of providing free surgery for trans patients who are in prison, and also for those who are detained in migrant centers. So I mean, it's not that she doesn't decide that she's repudiated this position, that she's changed her mind on it. So she comes across as an empty suit. She comes across as someone who's willing to say anything to get people's votes. And I mean, I think it's not enough to be against Trump if you think that Trump is awful, which I certainly do. You have to stand for something, and Harris just doesn't come across as doing that. So elections aren't just about policy positions. They're about character, and even if you don't think she has a bad character, she still has to have some character, and she doesn't seem to project any. Part of the way I think about it is that people need, and their votes express the fact people need heroes, and they need them so badly they'll vote for a fake hero or an anti-hero as opposed to a non-entity, and Harris is a non-entity.
Onkar, what do you think about? You said that other than abortion, there's nothing there. do you think of her as having some positive position? I mean, she's trying to position herself as Trump is doom and gloom. I'm going to be the alternative to that, something happy, something positive, the opportunity economy, pointing people in that direction. How do you process that?
Yeah, I have a even more negative view, I think, than Ben does of Harris. Like he called her a non-entity, and like that's what she was trying to project, I think. Like that's the most positive spin you could put on her, that she's a non-entity. This is a campaign of joy. Um, but if you asked for any content about anything, there was either nothing or something bad. And that, I think that's important, that it, other than on the abortion issue, the Democrats were better than the Republicans. And when you think about the midterms, and they ascribe the midterm victories and the Republicans doing worse than expected and so on to the abortion issue and to Roe v. Wade. And I don't think the Democrats are good on abortion, but they're better than the Republicans. But if you put that aside, and part of the issue of putting it aside is people rightly thought there's bigger problems than just abortion. And Roe v. Wade was overturned. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to have some kind of federal protection, and states that already protect abortion will put it in the Constitution or something like that. It doesn't affect people's lives that much. Overturning Roe v. Wade did, but there's nothing they can do about that. So on the other kinds of issues, it's true that she was trying to move towards the center, but I think in a way in which everyone would look and say, that's not really your views. That if you look at her and you would think, yeah, if anything, you're pro-Hamas. You're not on the side of Israel. You're on the side of Hamas. And you can try to say, no, we're going to protect Israel and so on. But when you look at what she did, who she's connected to in the party, what she's said about this, even as vice president, I think anybody looking at that would think, yeah, if anything, you're pro-Hamas, no matter what you say. And what was telling is she could give no explanation for her views changing. It's just, yeah, I don't hold that position anymore. Why did you used to hold the position? Why do you hold a different position now? There's no explanation. And I think it's revealing in terms of just thinking of what's happening in our politics, that there's an expectation, and the media drilled this in for Trump, that you repudiate elements that we think of as beyond the pale, like the Proud Boys, repudiate any connection to them, any support to them. And I mean, for how abysmally evil Trump is, he can't even do that. But they don't even ask the Democrat part, will you repudiate all the pro-Hamas people? And so they don't ask that, and the candidates don't answer, and Harris did not answer in regard to that. Or with BLM, do you repudiate the violent protesters for this? There's not a question like that, and I don't think one could say of Harris she does. So that's the way in which, if you're thinking, does she hold any positions, maybe she doesn't want to talk that much about them, but to the extent that she holds them, they're not good.
Yeah, I think this is a big part of the reason why she was unwilling to do long-form podcast-style interviews. And the way that the Republicans spun this was that she was low IQ. Now, she doesn't strike me as especially high IQ, but I don't think that was the reason. I think I think she knew that if she were going to sit down with Joe Rogan or whoever, Rogan would ask her about these very kinds of issue changes, and she would have to try to explain it. And it wouldn't be enough to say, to use a talking point to walk past it. They would drill down. And so the best that we got were very short interviews where she used a few talking points to try to talk past these kinds of policy changes. And I think that hurt her badly. Trump was willing to get on Rogan. He was willing to talk to Lex Friedman. He had all kinds of long-form podcasts, and say what you will about how coherent they were. He was at least willing to talk and try to, quasi-explain himself. I wanted to say something about the abortion issue too, because I agree with you, Onkar. It's as important as the issue is, and I think I've made my voice clear on that. It's a fantasy to think that it was gonna be the the decisive issue in an election like this, when just in fact, whatever the president's view on this was not going to change the outcome of or the status of abortion rights in America. It's now up to the states. There was zero chance that any kind of national abortion rights protection bill would pass, or if it were to pass, that it would be sustained by the Supreme Court. So that was just not an argument that she could make for why she could make a difference on the issue. And the other thing that relates to that is the way she and her campaign packaged the issue was just so inauthentic and dishonest. They put it under the heading of freedom, which was, arguably a tactical move they were making to try to appeal to some kind of language of Americanism. But if you look at the way they packaged it, and this came out in the convention, and we did a whole episode of the podcast analyzing this, they packaged it together with all the alleged freedoms that you are guaranteed if you have a right to health care, if you have the right to all kinds of different welfare rights. And so this takes the abortion issue and in effect turns it into a healthcare issue, turns it into yet another welfare right, which is completely uninspiring, sucks all the moral fervor out of it, and you don't inspire people to turn out just by promising them more programs, more 5-point plans, West Wing style wonkery. That's not the recipe for motivating somebody to get up and stand up for a cause.
Just to add to what you're saying, but that positioning of abortion as a healthcare issue and turning it into part of a welfare position, I don't think the Republicans really built on this, but it really feeds the Republican view of abortion as something that irresponsible women do. And in that sense, it plays into the wrong kind of context. In fact, it cedes the moral high ground completely, and it makes the case for the other side more credible. Because, so you just want other people to have abortions on my dollar, basically. Is that what you're asking for? And that's not just uninspiring. That's not what the issue is. That shouldn't be the way to think about it. And if that's the best you can come up with, it's sad, because there's a fundamental freedom at stake, and you're putting it in terms of a claim on other people's wealth and time, and so it's demoralizing from that perspective. This is how you're going to defend something really important. I wanted to ask you, Onkar, just on this, in terms of the record of the Biden administration, and how one of the points of analysis people make is she couldn't go against Biden because she was his VP, and she therefore couldn't differentiate herself, so she was in this no-win situation. How do you think of what the Biden administration's positions were, and what would a better candidate, how should they approach it, or how would you think of the kinds of things that have happened during that time, and how should she present herself on those issues to the nation?
Yeah. So I think you have to, at minimum, say you made a lot of mistakes. The Biden-Harris administration made a lot of mistakes. But I want to highlight something here about the way I think about the context, which is, if you're viewing the election or re-election of Trump as the end of democracy, the potential of the U.S. slipping into some kind of authoritarian regime or authoritarian government and mindset, the stakes are high. And the idea that, okay, I'm running for president and I was vice president under Biden, so I can't say anything critical of anything we did. That, I don't think it's true at any time. But if the stakes are that high, it has to be, and maybe Biden will be really angry and other members of the leadership in the Democratic Party will be angry. But you have to present an actual viewpoint. And in comparison, you could so have distanced yourself from Trump. Trump can't admit any mistake. He can't deal even semi-honestly with anything. And if you had as a contrast, yeah, we're willing to do that. So Trump describes January 6th as a day of love. That's like, it's so ludicrous. And so is it easy for him to go on an interview? Yeah, because he'll just make anything up, whatever pops into his head, he'll say, and the interviewers are not very good at challenging him. But imagine if Harris had said, yeah, people who criticize our Afghanistan withdrawal, they're right. That like it was really bad how, and you could still even have the position, we should have withdrawn from Afghanistan. We didn't have any, I mean, it's a mission going on 20 years. It's not clear it had any goal or any purpose. And we're spending an enormous amount. People are still dying and we need to withdraw. But the way we withdrew was a fiasco. And what it projected is weakness, and people got killed, and we left all kinds of people in Afghanistan stranded. And so you could say, yeah, like this was, nobody can look at this, and I don't look at this and think it was good. And that in contrast, like it would be, oh, there's an adult in the room versus Trump who can't face anything. But what you got from Harris was no. She was asked one question, and it was basically, I can't think anything we did wrong. And when she was asked, like, what are your flaws or something like that, it's, I over prepare or something like that. It was all, anybody, they might not know how to think about this, but that what you're seeing here is also not a genuine person with genuine views and who seems to be taking the job of the president seriously. I mean, I think Afghanistan, like that, the whole COVID, that they can't admit that anything went wrong, and like substantially wrong in regard to COVID. There's not much distance. I mean, there is, I think, philosophically, but from, you think of a voter, there's not much distance. They don't face anything that they did wrong, and Trump doesn't face anything that he did wrong. And so then it would be for other reasons I'm going to vote, but not because one's honest and the other one's not.
I just want to add to what you're saying about the context, because by the end of the campaign, it definitely became a talking point for the Harris campaign that the options are her and freedom versus Trump and fascism. He's a fascist. That's where we're heading. And so if you're trying to sell people those are the stakes, as you put it, calling him a fascist, but without actually having positives, without actually saying what you would do differently, without admitting to, here's how we would rectify some of the mistakes we made. Here's a reason to take me seriously. Then it empties the term fascism of all meaning, and it's like it's similar to what they were doing with her and calling her names, but we can come to that. But there's a danger in an empty slogan applied to your enemy when there are reasons to be worried about an authoritarian direction in America. I think that's definitely a worry. But if you speak of it in this way, and it really was frivolous, it was, well, let's see if this works in the last 6 weeks of the campaign, let's keep throwing this at the wall and see what happens, it empties it of meaning. And I think that's the way in which it's not taking seriously the actual stakes. It's you want people to believe this, but you don't believe it. If you did, you wouldn't behave this way.
I think that along with the unwillingness to repudiate old policies or to recognize the mistakes they made in the Biden administration, that's deadly when they're the incumbents, and when American voters have a propensity to want to throw the rascals out, and there's it's even part and parcel of the American sense of life to not want to be pushed around. And even if it turns out that Trump is going to do a lot of pushing around himself, there's a kind of recency effect. Well, who's been pushing us around most recently? And the COVID policies and the inflation and any number of regulatory aspects of the Biden regime. The Biden regime's the one that's been doing the pushing around. And so you don't mess with Americans in that regard. Even if they don't have a very long-term view and don't remember what things were like 4 years prior under Trump, they're going to push out the most recent pushers. And they might not get what they hoped for as a result. But if you don't try to make some amends for that by admitting that there were mistakes, you're in trouble.
I want to offer maybe a contrasting angle on this, Ben. So let's first talk about what is sense of life and how that comes up in this context. And so I'm going to give a snapshot, and people should go and read Ayn Rand's own explanation of her conception. So a sense of life is a kind of stand-in for philosophy. It's not fully conceptualized. It's held more in emotional terms. And it comes up in her analysis of America many decades ago. And I think what she was saying at the time, it tracks with what you're saying, that there's something distinctive about the American sense of what the world is like, what this confidence that comes with America is a place where you can do things, and I don't want to be pushed around. That's as opposed to I'm going to kneel before authorities, which is more the European perspective on life. And it's not a fully fledged philosophy, but it manifests in important ways. And you land in America and you feel it, and you go to other parts of the world and you see something different. So it has a reality. I'm less convinced that there are many Americans who still are American. And I say that as an immigrant who came here, and I went through great struggles to become an American. I think one of the things I've noticed in the last 20 years is that America is less and less American in that sense of life term, in those sense of life terms. And part of the evidence for that is I wish more Americans were saying, don't push me around during COVID. And then during all the things we've lived through in the last 10 years, and even before that. So there was some of it was more pronounced after 9/11, and it faded after 9/11. And there was, I think, demoralization. So I'm less and less convinced that the plurality of Americans still have this perspective. And my worry is, in fact, what you might point to as the American sense of life is something less positive, more grim, and more willing to go along with, okay, well, she sounds good, or he makes me laugh on Rogan, or to me, that's the philosophical issue, one of the philosophical issues that this election result brings up, which is there such a thing as what Ayn Rand identified as the best elements of the American sense of life? Does it survive still? What is evidence that it's around? And I'm open to being completely wrong. I'd be happy if I'm wrong on this, but I'm interested in your perspective, both Ben and Onkar, on that.
I mean, I think you're certainly right that many fewer people have it than used to, and probably not a plurality. I definitely think some still do, and it might be enough of them there might be enough of them to make a difference, from a swing voter perspective. I mean, independent voters are typically the swing voters, and independent voters are probably the ones who are more likely to change their mind based on who's most recently pushed them around. I mean, I know people who voted for Biden in 2020 who don't particularly like Trump, but who voted for Trump this time for that kind of reason.
Yeah, I think we should come back to this towards the end after we've talked about some of the more details, because I would say one element here that I think is real, and it warrants thinking and about just the whole phenomenon, and then thinking about some of the dynamics, which is the rejection of elites. And there's an element that's American. If the elites are trying to push you around, tell you what to do, and telling you you're stupid, and to rebel against that, there is a kind of American rebellion against that. But there is also such a phenomenon, and Trump is this, who is stupid and ignorant, and who resents elites because they know more than he does. And really, like, I'm as good as you, and there's that element at work here too. And it's very hard to parse what's dominating where. But this also, I think, in terms of thinking about Harris, she had to have seen herself as, I'm part of the elite. I will be seen as part of the elite. And can I make a genuine connection with voters where they don't think I'm talking down to them? This, when they talk about Reagan's communication skills, this was one of the things that he was good at, that people felt like he's talking to them in a genuine way. And I don't think there's one issue in which one could say, yeah, Harris is treating me like an adult, even if I didn't go to the Ivy Leagues or whatever. She's treating me like an adult and will talk to me as an adult. To take a different kind of, because the exit polls certainly indicate the economy and inflation was a big issue on voters' mind. Do you get any discussion that it makes any sense about inflation from, and as Ben's emphasizing, which I think is right, of the incumbents? And if they had said, and this is part of what was so bad about COVID, yeah, like if we bring a halt to production, and if that happens not just in America but worldwide, so production is grinding to a halt, and we're going to throw more money into the system, so you have fewer goods and more money. Yeah, inflation is the result of that. And if they had said it's not just us, which is true, Trump started this with COVID, but it included us. And this is part of why there's inflation, but one of the reasons it's going away is because production has resumed post-COVID. And yeah, we shouldn't have locked down in the way that we locked down, but we did. And so there is inflation, but there's reasons to think it might now lessen. You would at least have a chance of people thinking, okay, maybe you do have some understanding of inflation, and maybe we should give you a chance in a second term. But if you project a obliviousness or worse to inflation and no discussion of, well, what was the causes of it? Again, this is like an elite telling us, like, well, it's too complicated to explain it. We're not even going to bother. Why are you so worried about inflation? And that they will project, yeah, but you're not living paycheck to paycheck and so on. That's part of what happened here, I think. And it's, again, I have some sympathy. I have complete sympathy for the electorate. And I think there's a lot of bad elements that go into Trump support for Trump, but that from the perspective of this elite dynamic, that they would think, yeah, this will be 4 more years of elites telling us what to do. And we've had enough of that. I have some sympathy for that.
It really baffles me why the Democrats think if they trot out all of the Hollywood celebrities who endorse Harris, that is supposed to convince anybody to change their mind. I mean, A, why would it? But B, if anything, it reinforces the very mindset you were just talking about, Onkar, where this is the party of the elites, and yeah, the Hollywood people are having a great time and they want their buddies in power. What does that mean for me? And it doesn't matter how good of a musical act they add to the show either. Onkar, I think we've probably said our piece on the subject of why the Democrats didn't deserve to win. Does it follow that Trump did?
Yeah, my view is no. And that's like, I was a little depressed after the election, but not like 2016. And part of what I thought is, like, would I be more or less depressed if Harris had won and Trump? And it would have been, no, it'd be about the same. I find it, so the whole Trump phenomenon is depressing, but it's not that he wins the election. It's that you can resurrect your political career after January 6th. That tells you something about the whole Republican Party and tells you something about the country that is not good. Really, you couldn't come up with, after January 6th and after 4 years of Trump, you couldn't come up with a better candidate than this. But once he's the candidate, and so then I thought, compare in an election with Harris, he's going to win. So it's not him winning that, oh, it's so shocking. What should be shocking is that you can have a political career after January 6th. And I would put many other things that happened under his administration as there were many things that I viewed as this, just this episode should be disqualifying of you have a future political career in the United States. I think COVID was like that. I think his embrace of dictators, particularly the North Korean dictator, because we gain nothing from it, and you couldn't even say like we could gain anything from. They're developing nuclear weapons. They would continue to develop them under Trump. They continue to develop them under Biden. There's nothing they're going to do about it. He doesn't pretend he's going to do anything about it. It's not like I'm going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. There's not even a pretense we're going to contain North Korea or anything like that. And that, like, they're writing love letters to each other. That in the United States of yesterday, that would have been, okay, that's it. Like, you don't have a political future. And so that's what I found so disturbing. But once he's the candidate, and then you're gonna, it is true that the Democrats should have thought, yeah, we can't let another 4 more years of Trump, but so we have to feel the candidate who can beat him, and who can legitimately beat him, that it would make sense for the voters to reject Trump and vote for this person. Like, I think with all his flaws, and there were a lot, I still think Obama would have crushed Trump. That it's like part of that he's elected is 1, Hillary Clinton, and 2, Harris. Those are the two, and he couldn't even beat Biden. And Obama's a stronger candidate than Biden. So it's there's a real evil there, but it wasn't so much, oh, the election revealed it. It's he's your candidate is what revealed it for me.
And January 6th, I think, was really unforgivable. Just that, leave aside all the things that are even quasi-contentious. The mere fact that he didn't send out the National Guard to stop it, I think that by itself is disqualifying. And then, of course, all of the conspiracism about the election results, both prior to and subsequent to that. If there's a silver lining at all to this election, and it's a little hard to put it in those terms, it's that, look, the American people spoke, and in fact, the elections were not rigged, contrary to all the conspiracism. And doesn't that give the lie to so many of the theories that were circulating before? Now, I don't think it's going to actually be received that way. They'll come up with stories about, oh, this time they were watching more closely, and that's because of all the concerns that Trump raised. But in a way, the fact that he won and the fact that it demonstrates that no, in fact, the election system was not rigged, even in an election when the enemy party is in power, just makes Trump, in my mind, look worse, because it really gives the lie to all of the theories he was circulating about the 2020 election. Whether that will be recognized by anyone, I don't know. But it's the first thing that occurred to me, and what I wanted to say, if he won, it would be the first thing I would say, see. But of course, he has to win for it to actually be meaningful.
I think there are two big topics we should try to cover before we wrap up, and I just want to flag them, and you guys can tell me if you want to dive in. One is just, given the results, where do you think things are going to land, different areas of policy, and what are the implications of that? And then the other kind of question is, what does the future hold? And under that heading, I want to come back to this idea that you raised, Onkar, of thinking about the American sense of life, the American population, and trying to parse, maybe talk a bit more about this, the two sides of this anti-elite maybe anti-elite's not the right word, but the reaction to elites that is one part understandable, one way in which it's not, and talk about that. So where do you want to dive into?
Yeah, we should talk a little bit about policy repercussions, but I would say on the issue of, so I think it's true that the elections, from the story, they ran well. There weren't problems. There were a lot of problems were anticipated, including like disruptions at the polling station, and prior to it, there were those bomb threats in what was it, in Oregon? I think both of them were Oregon polling stations. So the day of the election seemed to have run smooth. I have less, and I don't know how much confidence versus hope yours was, Ben, that this will be will penetrate the people who are, that is, penetrate the minds of the people who are calling into doubt the election, because and you put it that it will expose the lies, but there was never any case that I've seen. So it was worse than lies. It was just arbitrary speculation, and that you don't dislodge the arbitrary in that way. So there's probably some people for whom, but this is one of the saddest things about the election. This was something I heard Sam Harris say, which I agree with in his podcast post the election, which was, he said he had the thought when I don't know how much you guys were watching election night. I wasn't watching from the start, but because I expected Trump to win. I started watching when it was, yeah, he's out polling everywhere, but the swing states haven't been called yet, but some are pointing in Trump's direction. And so it was pretty clear Trump's going to win, though a lot of things weren't called. And Sam Harris had the view, he said, like, he had this going through his mind that, yeah, well, now I hope Trump wins. And if you know Sam Harris, he's anti-Trump. Now I hope Trump wins, because otherwise the story will be, it was a stolen election. Look, again, Trump's winning early on, and now, but it turns out he loses. And the chaos and the violence that might ensue from that, it's better to have a peaceful transition of power, and that everybody expected. And this is important, and something like favorable for the Democrats and such a condemnation of the Republicans, that everybody expected Harris and the Democrats to concede that, yeah, we lost the election. And part of what Harris said, which is true, it's unfathomable that Trump would have conceded if he had lost, and it was close like this and so on. And that really is the threat of violence. Because imagine, like Harris said, this is after the fact and after he voted, but imagine somebody voting and thinking, I don't know, I like Harris a little bit more, but if she wins, there's a real possibility of violence, and if Trump wins, there isn't. That's the threat of violence that's influencing an election, and that is what Trump has introduced into, and it's such a corruption of the system, and it's so abysmally evil that I think just that, and this is part of the aftermath of January, you can't vote for Trump, and so it's yeah, there might be some people at the margin who, oh, okay, yeah, maybe the elections are more fair than I think, but there's a way in which I think Trump's game was heads I win, tails you lose, and that's part of the whole atmosphere for the election, and that's so un-American.
I want to interject what might be a correction, or maybe it's just a clarification. So in the conversation so far, we've been talking quite a bit in terms of Trump and then the Republicans, as if, maybe this isn't your view, but I think it can come across as there's Trump and then there's the Republicans, and then they don't really fit hand in glove, and maybe the Republicans could have done this, but Trump. So I want to present my view, which I'm interested to see how you think of this. I don't think there is a Republican Party in the sense of a body that has its distinct views and then it selects a candidate, and it's much more they're subservient to Trump, and Trump has filled the void of what it was a void. I don't think there's any positive to begin with if you think back 10, 15 years ago, such that it's unimaginable to me that they would have selected a different candidate and fielded someone better than Trump. I think it's just, they just are Trump's party. I can't see how we would have gotten. Imagine there is someone better on the Republican side, that they would have put him up and challenged Trump. And there's some of the evidence for that is what you brought up, which is, I remember vividly right after January 6th, even on the day, Republican after Republican coming out and said, how could this have happened? This is really unconscionable. I think someone even used that word. And then a week or two later, they're all back to, well, yeah, we have to look into this. Maybe this is the problem here. And how many Republicans voted to impeach him over this? My recollection, it was just Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney had nothing to lose at that point. And so it was by that point already, 4 years ago, it was clear the party was completely orbiting him, and he had 100% gravitational pull on everything. You've seen that in all the decisions when he's out of office, like the whole thing with the election option legislation this last year. The analysis is he influenced them to vote against it because tactically he thought this was advantageous. So the thread here is, I think the problem now is metastasized such that I think the Trump phenomenon has to encompass the Republican Party. And I think that's sort of the full extent of what we should be, the way I think of it, as it's not entirely separable in the way that we might want it to be, or it might have appeared to be in 2016, for example. Any reactions to that?
I think there's something to it, but I think you have to distinguish between Trump and the Trump phenomenon. And I don't think it's right that Trump is just the mastermind behind the scenes who makes everyone bend to his will. It's giving him too much credit, and it's not doing enough to think about the way in which he is himself a weather vane for popular opinion. And a really good example of this is the way he did a real 180 on the abortion issue. He obviously initially was the anti-abortion candidate and got a lot of support for that. But after Roe's overturned and after it becomes clear that it's a really unpopular decision, he says, no, I'm not going to sign a national abortion ban. I'm going to leave it to the states. And it's a sign that he's himself really just trying to channel something in the American in the American people's mind. And so, yeah, he's a figurehead, and that has an important dimension to it, and there's a cult of personality dimension to it. But he gets the power because he's channeling something. He's channeling something, pretty bad coming out of the American right. And another example of this is J.D. Vance. That it's not just Trump, it's Vance, and Vance is his successor, is going to be in a number of ways. And there's differences between the two of them, but common to them both is the fact that the right has repudiated free markets and individual freedom and has gone in a so-called populist direction. We did another podcast analyzing the Republican platform just from this perspective, that it's there's a number of ways here in which the right won this election by moving further to the left, and it's because in important respects the American public has been moving further to the left, caring less about individual freedom, demanding more centralized state power from a nationalistic perspective, perhaps, rather than an internationalist one, in order to get their policy preferences forced into power.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. I guess I would just restate my point as the Trump phenomenon is not distinguishable from the Republican Party anymore, the way it might have seemed years ago. That's really the thought. So I agree with you. I didn't mean to suggest that he is a political mastermind in the sense that he's sort of orchestrating things and is a whole plan. I agree with that. I think there's more of a void there. But the party and then more broadly conservatism as a political enterprise, I think that's what I'm trying to push into the same category. I'm just curious. So it seems like that on that we agree, but I'm interested in your reaction to that, Onkar.
Yeah, so I mean, a number of people have described it as Trump's takeover of the Republican Party, and there's something right with that way of looking at it. And so I think when he first emerged as I'm running for president, I mean, he's done that before, but then it was clear he has some support. There was a lot of conflict within the Republican Party, and I think some genuine people, and not just Romney. I mean, Romney's sort of the last man standing in regard to this, but it's that like we can't have this person as a candidate. I don't want A, B, or C, but there would be okay. Like they would still be representing the Republican Party. Trump is something alien to it, and that's why it's like a takeover. And what you saw, and part of what is so bad about Trump's impact is he drove out the better people. And then, so now when you look at it and you think, is there much of a difference? No, it's who seems to be in charge of the Republican Party are just Trump loyalists. They're so subservient and obsequious, it's hard to stomach. But that's part of what gives the atmosphere, but because it's a real atmosphere of this is an authoritarian regime. This is what happens in authoritarian regimes and how everyone kisses the ring. There's a question of when Trump's gone, what remains? And are there some people, so to take out, like he drove out Romney and he drove out Paul Ryan. So that like this was the vice presidential candidate and they can't even get in the party now. Will they try to come back? Will people like that try to come back? Right now, part of what Trump's done is delivered power into the hands, as you guys were saying, of the nationalists, of these kind of Christian nationalists, a J.D. Vance, a Hawley, a Ted Cruz. Though it's Ted Cruz, it's probably a little opportunistic for him. Hawley believes it. I think that J.D. Vance believes this kind of religious nationalism. That's it, so you've got a kind of populism, religious nationalism that's setting the terms for the party. That's new, and Trump's helped empower that. That's how I think of it.
Why don't we dive into some of the policy implications and then end up on to the path forward, the future, what that holds?
Yeah, I'll just say. So my basic view is both would be disasters in different ways. That is, if Harris had won, we'd have all kinds of really bad policy and some better things, say around abortion. And with Trump winning, there's going to be better things, and there's going to be things that are way worse. Immigration likely will be way worse if there's. It seems, at least from what's happened after the election, that they're going to try some mass deportations. I don't know if they're going to try it at the level that they say they're going to do it. I'd be surprised if that's possible that they're going to do it, but it's something bad, I think, is going to happen in regard to immigration. But in foreign policy, it's my view, it's sort of going to be a wash. I expect it will be better in regard to Israel, Iran. It will be about the same in a different kind of way for Ukraine. Because my view of what's happening in Ukraine now is we have no policy. They're sort of in a no-win war. We try to give them enough that they don't lose, but don't give them enough that they can win. And it's like a drawn-out, torturous. And they have a smaller population, so it's not like what's happening in Ukraine is good now, and oh my God, Trump might do something different. What's happening isn't good, and I don't expect if Trump does some kind of deal or gets it will be a concession to Putin and the aggressor. And long term, it's appeasement of naked force, and that always is disastrous. But it's not like what's happening now is good. And Russia, China, and dictatorships more generally, yeah, Trump will be more appeasing and more appeasing is more praising of these things. That's part of what would have been unfathomable again 15 years ago. A U.S. president praising dictators and sort of across the board, and dictators qua dictator. Like what he likes about them is the power they wield without any checks and balances. That's what he admires about it. And that would have been political suicide 15, 20 years ago. But so it's not going to be good in terms of foreign policy, but is it going to be worse than what we had under Biden? I don't think so. And we could go through other issues, but that's my general view. But how do you guys think about it?
I mean, if I'm definitely curious to hear what Elan says about this, but I think that there's some small chance that Trump is going to unleash Israel, at least in the short term, to take more strident steps against Iran, and that's maybe a bit of a silver lining with regard to foreign policy. I'm skeptical he's going to do it for them in the long term, because his modus operandi is to want to make deals, and so he's going to try to make some. It might not be a deal with Hamas, but it could be a deal with Iran. It could be a deal with Saudi Arabia, like the Abraham Accords were trying to pull off, and that's maybe an end to short-term hostility, but it's still a recipe for making it happen again in the future. And that's at best a silver lining, because what you said about the rest of the foreign policy context, Onkar, that if you empower Israel temporarily, but you're simultaneously empowering Russia and China, Russia's been a major force for hostility to Israel in for the past few decades, and you don't come out on Israel's side by getting buddy with Putin.
Yeah, I generally agree with that. I think the other thing that's worth remembering about Trump's foreign policy, I expect there to be some positives in respect to Israel in the short term. I think it's more the way I would summarize this is there isn't a policy, there isn't a Trump policy, and it's going to be chaotic, and some things are going to turn out better than other things just because of what we've seen in the past and some of the dynamics within what he feels is more important and people he has loyalty to. But it's not a predictable position based on a principle. It's the more of the kind of chaos that we've seen, but with different emphases here. And the thing I was going to bring up as a reminder for people, so you mentioned an American president admiring dictators for the fact of being dictatorial and having that kind of power. I think it's worth remembering one episode with Trump and our alleged ally Saudi Arabia, which is another place that we don't have a policy towards, and it's completely appeasing, and we empower the Saudi Arabian regime. And that's the Khashoggi murder that Trump helped to cover up. And it was just so blatant. It was hard to believe that the cover up would work on anyone. And that's what we had. That was Saudi Arabia. With Iran, he stands and he withdrew from the so-called Obama deal with Iran, which was a good thing, but it didn't really solve the problem because Iran's been doing other things in the meantime. And so it just, there is a kind of chaos with different emphases. I think it's worth saying something about so I've talked to different people about their reasons for being supportive of Trump. And one thing that comes up is Israel. They think that he's going to be better for Israel. And there's reason to believe that, as you guys have raised different aspects of it. The other one is,
I was going to say, there's even a caveat to that I'll come back to, but sorry, go ahead.
Well, let me anticipate and see if this is what you were going to say. One of the statements he made during the most intense fighting in Gaza was, let them finish it off, but look at the world, look at how it's harming UPR. And it was a textbook case of the decision not for the right reasons, a decision because you're going to be harmed in the eyes of other people, as opposed to doing what's right and for the right reasons. And I'm curious if you had other aspects of that. But I did want to say that one of the things people raise about Trump, which I think is right, is that he was favorable to certain industries domestically, particularly the energy industry. And I think that's important. I mean, energy is a non-negotiable. It's not something about, oh, if we had a little bit less, it's okay. It's indispensable to human life. And if that industry is liberated more, or it moves towards greater liberation, that's a good thing. Again, with the caveat that it may well be being done for not good reasons and short-term reasons that will come back and there'll be a sting in the tail. But I think that's important. Again, this is not in praise of Trump, but it's in recognition of the fact that these are some of the things to anticipate, and that they will have positive effects. And other things, as you said, immigration. I feel one of the things I was thinking about, I was in a conversation the day after the election, and what came up in the conversation was, imagine people who have relatives who are here who might be targets of these mass deportations. Imagine what it's like for them to wake up and think, okay, this is likely coming. There's going to be internment camps on the border. There's going to be mass militarization of immigration across the country. There are going to be raids at different places. There's a kind of terror that it will instill in people. And I don't have anyone in my family that's impacted by this, or even people I know, but I can empathize with that reality. I don't want to be in a country where that's looming over people, because I think it's so unjust. It's not like, anyway, we've talked about immigration and other concepts. I think that's something important to recognize, that this is what it's doing. Even if the scale is a tenth of what they promised, the threat of doing it at the scale of millions and millions of people, and the dislocations that will cause in the economy, if you're a small business owner, and if you leave aside whether you're going to be the person put in a camp or deported or whatever, that's like taking the United States, turning it upside down and shaking it and seeing what happens. And then, oh, we have to do this. It's really terrifying to me that that's what's being promised and that that's being endorsed by so many people. But let me hand it back to you. I'm curious, was I right in what you were going to bring up in terms of the...
Yeah, that's part of it, of his attitude in response to what's happening in Gaza. But the other is what we were talking about. Part of what he's empowering are the religious Christian nationalists. So part of the support for Israel is from this kind of evangelical BS perspective that the end of times and the second coming of Christ, it will happen in Israel, and we have to support Israel. And he sent Mike Huckabee, it's the story, he's going to be ambassador to Israel, and he falls squarely in this. And so part of it, but like the more specifics of it, is that he's on the side of the settlers. And what that really means is the kind of these religious mentalities who want to settle and get religion, and that's the worst of Israel. And that's so there'll be now an equate. Pro-Israel means to be pro-that, and that's not, and that will like, I don't have any sympathy to people who are pro-Hamas, but that they'll start thinking there's something wrong with it. We're so pro-Israel. If we're pro-Israel for that reason, yeah, there really is something wrong with what we're doing, and that's because he doesn't really have any. I don't think he cares about anything. So I don't think he cares about Israel, Gaza. Yeah, it's bad PR, so maybe he should do something. But he's empowering a different mindset, and that mindset has a certain perspective on Israel that is not it's not appreciating them for their virtues and criticizing them for their vices. It's praising them for their vices.
Yeah, it's empowering the religious nationalists, and they're very religious and they're very nationalistic, and their whole MO is to destroy what's left of the rule of law in Israel, which is sort of a mirror of some of what's happening, or what is threatened to happen under the religious nationalists that we've talked about in this conversation. Ben, any thoughts on some of the policy implications that have come up?
Just one on immigration issue that you mentioned. I definitely agree that if Trump even follows through with his promise to do mass immigration in partial terms, that it's going to be really bad. We're going to see a lot of injustice and a lot of human tragedies because of it. But in part because of that, I have a hard time believing he will go through with it to the extent that he wants to, that it would have such dramatic consequences for the economy. I mean, just the economy of Texas alone is heavily dependent on migrant labor, and that's an important state for his constituency. And so I think he's going to do something. He's going to do some kind of token roundups. They're going to be really bad, but it's going to be like the wall, where he promised to build the whole thing, and then built some token sections of it, and then blamed his inability to do more on Congress or whatever. I hope that I hope I'm not being naive about this, but it goes to the fact that he's. I mean, when you add to that also the fact that he got a surprising level of Latino support, that when a policy like that starts to affect at least the family members or friends of the people who were supporting him, that will also lose him support. Are there any other domestic policy issues we wanted to discuss, like regulatory policy, antitrust, inflation? There's plenty to be said. I don't know if it's worth belaboring it.
We might need to do more episodes just to unpack some of these down the road. But yeah, Onkar, it looks as if you wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah, it's just it's if somebody has a view of all these things would be better under Harris than Trump, I think that's mistaken. That and often what it is just they'll be bad in different ways. So yeah, but there's a lot to say there, and we will now be talking about Trump policies again because he will be in power. What we're talking about here is thinking about the aftermath of the election. I'll say from the wide perspective, my view is, and it's part of why I was depressed after the election, but not especially depressed, like, it would have been different if Harris had won. This goes to the issue of American sense of life, what's possible in America now. And for me, the significance of the 2016 election was how much support and approval Trump received. So not people, they may have said that, and I met many people like this who have said, yeah, I don't like Trump, he's bad, but he's the lesser of two evils in comparison to Hillary Clinton. And there for sure were people who I met who I think, yeah, they were sincere in that. And there were, Hillary Clinton, I think, is a real power luster. So there were just viscerally, even if you couldn't articulate it, that people had a negative reaction to Hillary Clinton. I think it was often warranted because I think she exudes power lust. And people can sense that even if they can't articulate it. And so I met people who voted for Trump and so who I think, yeah, this really was a lesser of two evils. But there was considerable support that at most that was a smokescreen to say I'm not supposed to like Trump, so I'll say he's the lesser of two evils. But I found within 10 minutes of conversation, it was, yeah, here's all the things they like about Trump. And I would often point that out. Like, notice you said that he's a lesser of two evil, but it doesn't really seem like you're treating him as evil. You're treating him as he's good, and then you're voting for him because you think he's good. And that, given the campaign that he ran, that I wrote something in the aftermath of the campaign, that it's really appealing to base elements, it's aspects of what a dictator runs on to gain power. I don't view Trump as a dictator. I don't view him as even that. I think he's more after prestige than power. So I don't view him as a power luster and so on. But what it revealed is that you can have a campaign like that and gain support. And I think in say America at Reagan's time, Trump could not have got the support that he got 30, 40 years later, and that tells you something bad about the country and its willingness to think. So one, I think, to way overplay the negatives and the fears, and then to think of a solution to our problems is some authoritarian figure who's going to tell everybody what to do. Everybody's going to bow to him. So that is, there's real elements in the country that will accept that and often even embrace it. Like the most diehard Trump supporters, I think, embrace it. But there's people who accept it. Yeah, what else are you going to do? Like, we're in such a predicament. But I think it's on both sides of that. This is what is part of what is depressing, but it's not, well, that there's Trump, but it's the Democrats aren't like this. And I think COVID revealed that on the side of the people who think, oh, they think those MAGA supporters, they will embrace authoritarians, people ordering everybody around. But when you look at what happened with COVID, and to this day, for the people who will think of themselves more, I'm the Democrat, left-leaning, that they think COVID was basically okay. Like, it was an emergency, and COVID's going to kill us all, which wasn't true at all. And yeah, so you need people to take total power, close down the economy, tell everybody what you can do, and like that's normal. Like that. So there wasn't rebellion against that, and there still isn't rebellion against that. It does not speak well for the country and its citizenry, unfortunately. But so that's part of what's depressing about the whole election for me. But it's not like the election results revealed that. It's the whole embodiment of what's happening and who the candidates are, and that nobody will talk about COVID, for instance, and how bad it was, and that we can never do that again. We're 2016 and its aftermath to me is, yeah, we're closer to dictatorship than one may have thought. It's still not like in the next year or something like that, but you could see it in America now. That when I first moved to America, no, I wouldn't have said that it's possible in America. So
well,
that's kind of depressing, but
it's a depressing note to end on. But I don't think we can spin it any other way. And like you said, Onkar, we're going to have, I'm sure, many further discussions of the incoming Trump administration in the years to come. So our audience should get ready for that. And I just want to thank you both for having this conversation. And we will be back again next week with more. Thank you, everyone.